Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 231. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about temples and night markets and the world's second tallest building as we go to Taiwan.
Cathedral, got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before I get into this week's interview, I do have two news stories for you. In the first story, the Federal Safety Panel has looked at the story of the U.S. air flight that went down in the Hudson, Flight 1549, and they've come out with some recommendations, like actually putting life vests on planes. That plane was not required to carry life vests because it wasn't planning on flying over water. The other interesting thing that I saw in that you should all pay attention to is that only 33 passengers reported to having put on a life vest, and only 4 managed to completely fasten it. So next time they do the safety demonstration, pay attention. And the second news story comes out of that failed terrorist attack in New York City. The good news was they managed very quickly to identify the suspect and to put them on the no-fly list. The bad news is the airline he got on, Emirates, was using an old copy of the list, and so they've changed the rules to make airlines check the no-fly list just a little more often. For links to both those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. And before we get into our interview, I do want to remind you that you can get a free audiobook from Audible by going to amateurtraveler.com/freebook. The book that I just finished listening to is called Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk, about using social media to start a company, and that was a gift from Danny, so thank you very much, Danny, for that. I really did enjoy the book. I'd like to welcome to the show Matt Anderson, who's come to talk to us about Taiwan. Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks a lot, Chris, for having me.
And you are not in Taiwan right now. You are actually living, as I understand it, in South Korea and teaching English?
Yes, I'm actually teaching in South Korea in Ulsan, a city in the south. And I'm originally actually from the St. Louis area, but I've lived the past couple of years in Chicago.
Taiwan. Why should someone go to Taiwan? You pitched this to me that we hadn't done a show on Taiwan, and I could have sworn we had, but you were right.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised, actually. Well, one of the great things about Taiwan is that it doesn't have as many Western tourists as a lot of places do. A lot of people go to Japan, China, Southeast Asia, especially Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, but not a lot of people go to Taiwan. So it's nice to get away from the beaten path a little bit of Western tourists. But it's great because Taipei is a great city. It's beautiful, very developed, has great transit, amazing temples and buildings, and some of the best night markets in Asia. But there's also other cities like Tainan, which is great. It's a little bit smaller than Taipei, easy to get around by walking. There's an amazing walking tour. And then there's the East Coast, which is pretty untouched. Green mountains, giant gorges everywhere, big valleys, just a beautiful coastline of unexplored beaches. So it has a nice diversity to the country. You can get pretty much anything you want. And then in the south, it's great because there's a whole different culture. The north is very Chinese, as most of Taiwan is. But in the south, there's actually a lot of aborigines. So there's a whole different aboriginal culture in the south.
So if I were to go to Taiwan, what kind of itinerary would you recommend? Where should I start? Should I home base in Taipei, or do I want to stay in different places?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say start in Taipei. That's where you're going to be flying into anyway. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of friends who have actually gone to Taiwan and haven't left Taipei. And I kind of understand because they've usually been there for 5 days or less.
Okay.
So Taipei is a great place. If you're only going to be in Taiwan for about 5 days, you can stay there and you won't get tired of the city. It's a great city. So yeah, you can definitely start there. The good thing about Taiwan is that it's actually really easy to get around.
Okay.
There's trains that can take you anywhere on the island. Obviously, it's a pretty small place. It's not too difficult to get anywhere on the island, actually. There's buses and trains that can take you anywhere. So it's really nice. And I should actually preface this by saying I was there during Chinese New Year.
Okay.
So it might be a little bit of a different experience for other people who are going outside that major holiday.
And then let's go into a little more depth then on Taipei. So we're going to start in Taipei.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do in Taipei? So you're recommending we stay there for 3-4 days, it sounds like?
3 days would be good, definitely.
Okay.
There's plenty of temples that'll whet your appetite basically in the beginning, but I think one of the main things to do is to just check out some of the night markets. There's lots of great night markets in Taipei, all over Taiwan, but especially in Taipei. One of the best ones being Shilin Night Market.
Okay.
And that actually has some of the best food I've ever eaten, not just in Asia, but anywhere in the world. A lot of people go there. There's fun games to play where you can waste some money on some carnival-type games, but you really go there to eat some really great food.
Okay.
There's a lot of different kind of food they have. Fried chicken. There's steak dishes with sides of rice, great noodles. There's something that I don't really know the name of it, but it looks like a hot dog, basically. Instead of the bun being bread, it's a rice bun with a sausage inside, and it's really delicious. They cover it in sauce. I wouldn't say, if you're looking for healthy food, the night markets aren't necessarily the best place to go.
Now, the night markets here are all food, predominantly food. There's also a lot of shopping. What else am I going to find at the night market?
Okay, yeah, definitely lots of shopping as well.
Okay.
They got a lot of trinkets, and I'm not usually a huge fan of shopping in these night markets because you kind of find the same things everywhere you go. Some of the stuff actually comes from Thailand and China, things like that, so it's not necessarily unique to Taiwan.
Okay.
But every once in a while you'll get some gems in there. There's some places actually in the south that I can get to a little bit later where you can get some things made by the aboriginal peoples that would be pretty neat.
Okay, so it sounds like similar to what we saw in Hong Kong, which is some good bargains for shopping, but not necessarily a lot of things really uniquely Taiwanese.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's definitely the case in the north. In the north.
Okay.
There's lots of great temples, of course. One of the main things a lot of people do is the Taipei 101. Now it's the second tallest building, I believe, now that Dubai has.
I think it's the tallest functional building right now until they get the Dubai one back online or whatever.
Okay, great. Well, it's the tallest functional building then, so it's pretty neat to go in there and to say you've been up there. It's kind of nice because it has an outdoor observational deck. And inside there's some pretty great information. It's actually a lot more interesting than I thought it'd be. A little ball inside called the tuned mass damper ball. I'll send you a pretty funny picture about that actually, where they use some incorrect English when describing it. But it's pretty interesting to go up there and to see Taipei from a bird's eye view. So, of course, that's one of the things I recommend. It's not too expensive, so that should be on the list. And on top of that, though, the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial site is actually pretty neat.
Okay.
And I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Well, I at least know who you're talking about, so...
Okay, good, yeah. The memorial site there is actually really neat. And it's kind of right in the heart of the city, so there's a lot of really great restaurants around that area. I think, honestly, one of the main things to do in Taipei is just eat everything. It's all safe. Some of the street food, you can get it anywhere. It's amazing. Like I said, the night markets, but lots of the restaurants are just to die for there, so...
And favorite street food or favorite restaurant?
Favorite street food, I think, would have to be what I'd have to talk about. There's some fried chicken right as soon as you go into the Shilin night market where I was talking about earlier. It's really amazing. It's not a health food choice again. It's pretty greasy fried chicken, but it's nothing like I've tasted in America or anything like that.
So is this the battered and sweet fried chicken, kind of a General Tso's fried chicken, or sounds?
Yeah, I guess so. One of the things I've noticed since I've been in Taiwan and I've actually had real Chinese food in places like that is that it's nothing like what you'd get in America, I guess, and what you're used to for Chinese food. I actually worked in a couple Chinese food restaurants when I was in college in America. Mm-hmm. I guess that would have to be probably the closest to American Chinese would be that battered, deep-fried chicken. It didn't have the sauce like General Tso's chicken would have, or orange chicken. But yeah, I guess it was kind of similar. So.
Okay. And then did you have a favorite restaurant since you were also talking food?
Yeah, that's something I definitely can't comment on. Not because I don't have a favorite restaurant. I really didn't know the name, so.
Okay. It was something that had Chinese characters in front.
Yes, exactly. My Chinese is not great.
Okay, I understand. I only speak a little bit of Chinese myself.
Well, you're probably... Okay.
Yen. And then anything else we want to do besides eat and do the night markets and do the tall buildings and the temples? Actually, you didn't mention favorite temple. You mentioned going to the temples in Taipei.
There's a lot of great temples spread out all over Taipei, but there's the Confucius temple, which is really, really great. And then I think the Boan temple, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that again correctly, but that's B-O-A-N.
Okay.
It's a really great temple. And then the Longshan temple. These are all some of the major ones that you'd find in any of the guidebooks that will recommend you going to.
Okay.
And like I said, I was there during the Chinese New Year, so it was really bustling.
Sure.
When you go into the temples, you see a lot of people praying. I don't think it would be as busy during the rest of the year, which can be good and bad. It was kind of nice to see people in their element, though, getting a chance to see Chinese New Year's. But another thing I would mention in Taipei to do, and I know that you ask a lot of people about a good side trip, Beitao, I think it's Beitao or Peitao, depending on who you're talking to. Some people pronounce with a B and some with a P. It's a hot spring area right outside of Taipei. You can take the subway there, so it's not a problem. You don't have to track down any particular bus or train. It's really great. It's just a natural hot spring. There's hot springs all over Taiwan, I should actually say. If you're in Taiwan, this just happens to be a pretty great spot to go to. And it's outdoors. It's a really high-grade water. They have lots of different types of hot springs you can go to with different minerals and vitamins in the water. And this one is the brown hot spring, so it's apparently the best and highest quality water. So it was definitely a treat. I felt really refreshed after going there.
And then you mentioned getting out from Taipei and doing other parts of the island. You mentioned going to a couple different regions. Where would you recommend we go next?
I was actually, like I said, lucky enough to go during Chinese New Year, and I went with my girlfriend. Her friends live in Taipei. So after we had actually been able to spend Chinese New Year with a family, she stayed there, and I went on my own and went down the East Coast, and I did this by bicycle.
Okay.
So I did a cycling trip down the East Coast.
Just solo?
Yeah, just solo cycling trip. This is something that is, I guess, somewhat common. It's not extremely common. I didn't meet any other Westerners doing this. But biking is pretty big in the Taiwanese culture. There's a lot of people that do it. And I did meet a lot of people on my way down, but I think if you get a chance to see the East Coast, not necessarily riding a bike down it or anything like that, I think that is one of the best parts about Taiwan.
Okay.
It's just completely untouched. All you see are small towns mostly. Every once in a while there'll be a bigger city. But I actually took a train from Taipei to Hualien. That is a tougher one to pronounce also. It's on the northern part of the East Coast. It's called Hualien, and I rented my bike there. And that's actually a pretty neat city to check out too. You could do that in a day or so. It has some pretty neat temples, a pretty river, and some decent night markets in Hualien also. Mm-hmm. That's a nice place to check out on the East Coast, and that is a jumping off point usually for something that is pretty popular in Taiwan called the Taroko Gorge.
Okay.
Which is just a giant gorge, a really beautiful green spot, kind of nestled in the mountains there. It's a very, very neat thing to check out. You can get there by various buses, and I chose to ride my bike there. I spent the first day checking out the gorge. It's definitely a very beautiful area of Taiwan, pretty much the whole East Coast. Hualien is also a pretty nice city. If you need to skip it, it's not the end of the world, but it would be nice to see the gorge, if anything.
Okay. But so what I'm picturing here is green, steep hills. Is that the right mental image?
Yeah. When I was actually biking the East Coast, it would be that pretty much the entire way. On your right, well, I was going south, so in this case on my right, there's giant mountains everywhere. Mm-hmm. So just beautiful, green, luscious mountains and waterfalls. On your left-hand side is just the coast. So, yeah, pretty much deserted beaches.
Okay.
I would definitely recommend seeing the East Coast if you could. If you're not into the whole biking thing, and I can understand. There was a lot of people doing it by scooter or motorcycle trip, which also seemed pretty interesting. But a lot of people were just heading south for the New Year to relax a little bit in the south. And I would see them going by in cars. I just think it'd be a really great road trip. It's one of those trips that you'll always remember. I know that you being in California, there's plenty of highways out there that are just worth just driving down. It's not necessarily go see this city or go here. It's just enjoy your ride. I think that's a really great place to do it. So along the way, there's lots of great food places. There's
a theme here, Matt.
I think it's one of the great reasons to go to Taiwan is just to eat. To be honest, I had talked to a friend about it who had been out of Taipei before I had been there, and he said, just eat everything. I followed his advice. So
that works better if you're doing the biking trip, I think. But
yes, yeah, you definitely need to eat as much as possible. So there's definitely plenty of chances. I met some really great Aborigine people, actually, or some of the most memorable people on the ride that I bought bananas from that they had grown and pork from that they had raised, and it was actually some really amazing food, just a little place on the side of the highway. So
okay. And that's what you were mentioning too, then in the South we're going to get more of the influence that's not the nationalist Chinese influence that came over to the islands in the 1940s, but instead the native Taiwanese or Formosan people.
Yeah, yeah, the people who have been there, I think about 4,000 years. I think the Aboriginal people have been there. They're mostly in the South. I think the Japanese, during their rule, I don't know if it was a genocide, but a lot of attacks against the Aboriginal people, and they were kind of forced into the South and into the mountainous area. I guess I should kind of explain the island. In the South, there's Kenting National Park, which is a pretty nice national park. There's a main strip that's kind of overrun with tourists. It's kind of an interesting area. It's kind of like a carnival type area. I can get into that a little bit more. Then the West Coast has Tainan. It's actually more developed. So there's a lot of factories there, a lot of major cities. And then there's the East Coast, which, like I was saying, is pretty unspoiled. And then in the middle, it's completely covered by mountains. So it's also very, very beautiful. There's a lot of really great highways, I guess, in between some mountains that are apparently really amazing. I didn't have a chance to see that, though. So it's interesting. Most of the people that are living in Taiwan are either in the north, the south, or on one of the coasts. There's not a lot of people living in the middle. But that's where the Japanese, I know, forced a lot of the Aboriginal people to go. So aside from Aboriginals, there's not a lot of other people out there.
As you look at the trip that you took, you mentioned the guidebooks at one point. What did the guidebooks recommend that you thought was actually a little bit of a waste of time?
Well, there are some really good, and again, I'm talking about food here, but there were some really good food places that I read about. And I don't know if they were on their way to writing a new guidebook by this time, but I had the newest version, and it seemed like all the places that they recommended that we went were out of business. So that was one of the things.
Well, that's something that's tough with anything that's a print.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we'll run into that. Every time I talk to somebody who's used a guidebook, that's quite common that you'll run into that sort of thing just because restaurants change. Anything, though, in terms of the general advice?
Honestly, no, they did a pretty good job. I read some of Lonely Planet, actually. I did that. I had borrowed a friend's copy in Korea here, where I live. I borrowed a friend's copy and read a little bit in the Lonely Planet, but I had also read a lot from Rough Guides. Actually, Lonely Planet did a really good job. One of the things that kind of stuck with me was that they mentioned not going to Snake Alley, and I'd kind of forgotten about that. Because when I got there, a lot of people were saying, oh, a great place to go. I think that a lot of Western tourists like to go is Snake Alley. And I heard Snake Alley, Snake Alley. It's another night market, I guess, that's somewhere in Taipei. But one of the things that Lonely Planet said about it was that it's not really a very good place to go to bring Western tourists there, and they're pretty much skinning snakes alive there. And it's just a place to go basically to be scared. I guess you can drink snake blood, but they're pretty much just killing these harmless snakes and skinning them alive. So it's one of the things I skipped. And I'm glad that Lonely Planet said something about it. I don't think I'd really want to see that. That's not something I'd morally be interested in, I think. So.
Okay. In terms of things that they missed that you really think that people ought to do?
Of course, I mentioned the East Coast. I think that's the number one thing I did. Tainan was nice. I loved Taipei. Kenting was good. But the East Coast was really the most beautiful thing I saw. And you could see that there were signs that they were going to be building on it at some points. Just small things being started, towns growing, things like that. I don't know how long it's going to be that beautiful. So.
Okay.
Honestly, it wasn't really mentioned that much in the guidebooks. They mentioned some of the major cities and some of the smaller towns, but they didn't really have any information on just renting a scooter maybe, or renting a car and just checking out the East Coast, or in my case, a bike. So.
Okay. Besides more Chinese, what do you wish you had known before you'd gone?
Chinese would have been nice. Something besides Chinese that would be nice to know is that like I said, I went there during the Chinese New Year, which was good and bad. It was kind of nice to go there and have a different experience, I think, that most people get. And I did get to spend some time with a family that really helped us a lot and everything. But it would have been nice to know that everything is about double the price. So
okay.
if you go during those 2 weeks of Spring Fest, some people call it Chinese New Year. If you go then, you better expect to spend a lot more, sometimes, especially on hotels, double the price what you'd be spending during the non-Chinese New Year time. So it was nice because you definitely get to see Buddhism is right in front of you at all times. I don't know if I ever went an hour without hearing fireworks exploding for the whole 10 days we're there. It was constant firecrackers everywhere. And at first it was kind of annoying, but it is really kind of interesting. It's just people celebrating the entire time. So it is worth going then, but it would have been nice to know that it's going to be a lot more expensive than I expected. So.
Interesting. Okay. One warning you would give?
One warning I would give is to be careful when you're crossing the street. I was kind of used to the same thing in Korea, and I'm sure it's in a lot of places like this in Asia that I've been. Wasn't so much that I noticed this in Japan, but other places, there's scooters everywhere. And I think it probably rivals Vietnam and Cambodia in that way, that you gotta be really careful about scooter traffic. And that red lights don't necessarily mean that they're going to stop. The sidewalks are not off limits. A lot of things like that. And I know that that's pretty common all over Asia, but it was pretty surprising in Taiwan. I haven't gone to Southeast Asia yet. I hadn't seen that in Japan or in Korea, so it was a pretty big surprise, definitely.
Yes, I recall going to Shanghai and finding out that red lights were decorative.
Oh yeah, it's the same here. And if you really want to be safe, you're not even on the sidewalks. So there's always that too.
Okay. Do you have one picture that really summed up Taiwan for you, that really you thought was enigmatic?
Well, that would have to be something, I think, on the East Coast. There's a few, honestly, but I think one of those would have to be just a really nice picture of flowers and rice paddies on every side, and then you see the coastline on the other. It's not the most beautiful picture in some ways. It's pretty dark, but in a lot of ways it was pretty cloudy the entire time I was on the East Coast. But it definitely makes me think of Taiwan. When I think of Taiwan, I actually think of the East Coast more so than Taipei. So,
the biggest surprise?
Honestly, it'd be kind of a sad one, to be honest. When I went down south, you'd see some of the things the Aboriginal people were selling. There would be some things that they made by hand, a lot of really interesting souvenirs that you could buy. It was also kind of sad, some of the money that they were making and some of the things they were selling, I think they were kind of identifying themselves with Native Americans, I guess. Okay. So they were selling like miniature teepees and headdresses, things like that. So I don't know.
Have nothing to do with the culture per se.
Exactly. They have nothing to do with the culture, but I guess that's just one of the ways they make money is that people see that and that's what they want to buy. That's the kind of Aborigines you would see, I guess, in Hollywood or something like that. So it was honestly a little bit sad, I guess. Some of the other surprises is that I didn't really see a lot of American and a lot of English-speaking tourists like I do in Korea and that I've seen in Japan. There was actually a lot of Spanish speakers. And in Kenting, in Kenting in the south, they had a lot of Mexican food, some amazing Mexican food, which my girlfriend and I were very happy to eat. It's something we miss from America. But there was a lot of Mexican food, a lot of Spanish-speaking people, a lot of bands, and some of these people were tourists and some of the people were just living there. So I was surprised by how many people spoke Spanish. It was kind of a nice chance to practice some of our Spanish. So
I would not have expected that.
No, that was a surprise, and my girlfriend was especially happy as Spanish is her first language. So,
Most memorable person you met?
My most memorable person I met would have to be, and it would be more than one person, it would be actually a family.
Okay.
My girlfriend, I'll just call her name's Sandra. All through college, one of her best friends was Taiwanese, her friend Vivian. The main reason that we went to Taiwan was to visit her. She took us in during Chinese New Year. We got to spend a lot of time with her family. Her dad basically made my bike trip possible as much as I was able to look into it, which is, there wasn't a lot of English information on renting a bike and things like that. I couldn't find anything and I kind of gave up. But he looked into it, made a lot of phone calls for me. When I was on the road and couldn't find a place to sleep, he made calls to local police stations where they actually offered a place for me to stay there for the night.
Did you have to commit any felony to do that, or
I could have slept
maybe?
Well, in the end, luckily, they just found me a different place to stay, so I didn't have to sleep in a cell. I would have done it, but I'm kind of glad I didn't. But there was always the option. Yeah, so because of him, I was able to find a place to sleep every night on my trip without having to just camp on the beach without anything. That was great. The whole family was basically just really, really warm to me. Her cousins were great. Her mom, who had cooked a lot of food, she was great too, her whole family, and of course Vivian. It was just, there was a lot of people I had met for the first time that were extremely helpful and that definitely made my trip a lot better. So they would be the most memorable people.
Excellent. As we go to wind this down, finish this sentence for me. You really know you're in Taiwan when what?
Well, I guess I might have a different experience if it's not Chinese New Year's. But you know you're in Taiwan when delicious smells come from every angle. There's a cacophony of fireworks and scooters zooming by, and the temples are flooded with people praying everywhere you go.
Okay. And if you had to summarize Taiwan in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Dichotomy, the north and south. Delicious, of course, I got to talk about the food. And diverse. Definitely. The East Coast, seeing things like that, the undeveloped parts, and then going to Taipei, where it's just an extremely developed city. Yeah, I guess that would be my 3 words.
Excellent. Well, Matt, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and telling us a little bit about your trip to Taiwan.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris. I really enjoy the show.
My travel resource for today is a bit meta, and that is because this is a travel resource that tells you about travel resources. It's called the Travel Resource List at travelresourcelist.com. Check it out. It has links to all sorts of different companies that are in the travel space, as well as other websites, travelresourcelist.com. I had an interesting conversation this week about a potential trip that I may get to take, and I can't tell you where it is yet because it's not all finalized, and it might fall through. But if this does come through, there may be a contest with a really good prize, including a really good trip. So you may want to get on the Amateur Traveler newsletter so you don't miss out on that. Just a heads up. And you can subscribe by going to amateurtraveler.com/newsletter. Congratulations go out to Jonathan Reed, who won the April photo contest with his picture of shadows in the Sahara Desert. You've got to check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes. And for those of you who are looking at the enhanced version, that's the picture you're now seeing. And Jonathan won a copy of Ralph Velasco's book about how to improve his photography, although, as someone who pointed out, Jonathan may not need that book. And Ralph, again, is the person that I'm doing the photo tour of Egypt with. And if you're interested in signing up for that, go to amateurtraveler.com/tours. And there is a photo contest here for May. Same prize, the book. And the theme for this particular contest is going to be sense of scale. So show something in your photo so that you know how large something else in the photo is. And if you go to the Facebook fan page, you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about, because we've had some great examples that have been submitted. And again, that's facebook.com/amateurtraveler. And lastly, again, I could use some help if you have some ideas of who would be interested in advertising on the Amateur Traveler. That would be terrific. If you want to leave a comment, go to amateurtraveler.com or send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. You can also connect with me on Twitter @Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
And then there's that bell. Oh boy. Okay, so there's that bell I was talking about.